Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Jason, and today I'm joined by Todd Nicholas, the co-founder of Wheeltree Press and the co-host of the Jank Cast. Hey, Todd, welcome to the show.
Hi there, Jason. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be on the Gauntlet.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. So you are here mostly just to talk about The Sword, The Crown, and the Unspeakable Power, your game that you have in Kickstarter. But before we dive into that, I want to tell the listeners a story and tell you a story, I guess, as well. So I got back into role-playing games around 2011, 2012, after what was essentially a decade hiatus. I was playing like German and European style board games during those years. And I came back to role-playing games through the Burning Wheel. The Burning Wheel it really spoke to me in terms of the theory of role-playing games, like that text includes a lot of like RPG theory and stuff. And so I was really excited about this idea of like getting back into role-playing games and like there's all this new thinking about role-playing games. It was really exciting, I was just really into it. And I was following Luke Crane like everywhere, like in terms of like the podcasts he was doing and the interviews he was doing and stuff. And he was on this show where they talked about role-playing game theory, and the Jank Cast came up, right? Your show. And I was like, I'm going to go check that out. That sounds like my jam. So I found your show and I proceeded to listen to basically the entire archive, which is like, many, many, many episodes.
Literally hundreds of episodes.
It's hundreds of episodes. Yeah. I was driving a lot for my job at that time. Like I had like these long, like stretches on the road, like hours a day. And you guys were like just there, like almost like a constant companion, like during all these like long hours on the road. And it was just great. The Jank Cast like totally opened my eyes to like new ways of thinking about role-playing games. You guys exposed me to so many games I'd never heard of, and I probably would have never played if not for hearing about them on your show, like My Life with Master and Misspent Youth and The Final Girl, one of my favorites, like stuff like that. It was just the Jank Cast was just so hugely important to my fandom in the hobby, right? Like it was just a really, really big part of like me, like how I enjoy the hobby and how I wanted to roleplay. And so it's really exciting for me to have you on the show right now.
That's great. It's funny because, so this as a podcaster, you have no idea how many people are listening. And I can't stress enough that there are no good ways to know how many people who...
It's bad, yeah.
It's so weird because there's so many different ways people download podcasts. So we just kind of gave up on it, right? Like at first when we started, we were kind of like, well, do we know how many people a month listen? But we have no idea. So we often operate under the impression that no one's listening. And when we hear things like that, like I remember seeing like the Gauntlet popping up, and I remember seeing you saying like, oh yeah, we're influenced by the Jank Cast, and me going, oh, really? Oh, okay, someone listened, cool. And checking out your podcast and going, yes, this is great. Like, I'm so glad that like, it felt good because that was my story too. I was someone who got back into the hobby. And I think this is a lot of people's stories. We did a whole episode on this of like getting back into the hobby, that a lot of people do it when they're a teenager or something and then let it fall off in their late teens, early 20s, and then get back to it. And one of the things that got me back into it was podcasts. There was Fear the Boot and the Podcast and Narrative Control and The Walking Eye. There were just so many good podcasts I was listening to. Yeah. And, that's why we started doing ours. And it felt good to kind of see that, the circle is complete, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
That's all those people got me back into it. And I couldn't really, there's no way I could give back to them, but to feel like I'd kind of been a part of passing the torch on to someone else. It's really good to hear that. So yeah, I'm very excited to be on.
It's super thrilling for me. Like I've spent so many, many, many hours, fun hours, like wonderful hours, like listening to, you and Megan and Timo and Joe and Jen. And it's just super cool. And you're right. You don't know how many people are listening, right? Like you have some rough measures,
Yeah.
Like, okay, we have some downloads here, but that doesn't count people who are streaming, and that doesn't count this or that. And so you kind of don't know. Like whenever I go to a con now and someone's like, oh yeah, I listened to Discern Realities, or oh yeah, I listened to Gauntlet, I'm just like, oh, that's so cool. Like you get so excited, Anyway, super awesome. So let's get to Scup now that I've fanboyed a little bit.
Sounds good.
Well, so The Sword, The Crown, The Unspeakable Power, with the acronym SCUP, which I think is what it's popularly known by. Give us an overview of it. What's it about?
So, like you just said, it's a game with a pretty name and a gross acronym. The Sword, The Crown, and The Unspeakable Power, which we'll probably call SCUP from here on out, is a dark fantasy role-playing game that's being put out by myself and my co-designer Tom. And we are putting it out through the game kind of, whatever you want to call it, game collective, run by mostly by myself and Megan, with assistance from Jen and Scott, also from the cast. And it's a dark fantasy role-playing game focused on politics and intrigue, and in particular close-up politics and intrigue, kind of interpersonal drama between people. It uses the Powered by the Apocalypse system, like many, many games do. We thought that was kind of a good system for this. We kept a lot of the core of it because I think it's already pretty good at doing politics and intrigue and interpersonal drama.
I think that's right.
Yeah. And then we moved around a lot on the edges, which we can talk about over the course of this cast. So the setting is kind of whatever you want it to be. We envision something kind of dark fantasy, and you could kind of set that wherever. A lot of people will do a sort of medieval kind of fantasy, European medieval fantasy thing. I've also played games that were kind of Mesopotamian themed. I've played games that were Egyptian fantasy themed. I've played games that were Asian fantasy themes, as we've done kind of different playtests of it. But you build your own world at the beginning of it. And really what it was is we were kind of interested in doing something that looked a little bit like A Song of Ice and Fire, the first Law series by Joe Abercrombie, that sort of thing. That's really what we had in mind as we were designing it.
That's cool. Can you talk a little bit more about this idea of building the setting? I don't think it's something I knew about the game before.
Yeah. Tom and I really liked the idea of, because you do this a lot when you play Apocalypse World, for example, right? If you sit down to play a game of Apocalypse World, you kind of have to build your apocalypse. And that's often one of the most fun things in the game. I played a PbtA Apocalypse World game about a year or two ago with Rich Rogers. That was just a great game.
He's such a good play-by-post guy, isn't he? Yeah, he's amazing.
And it took place in Seattle, like post-apocalyptic Seattle, and it was all rained out. There's this acid rain, because Seattle rains a lot. There's this acid rain that kind of stripped away everything, and we kind of were coming up with all these fun things like, well, what would it mean in a society where rain was bad? Well, like, good is dry. So, like, if someone's dry, that means they're a good person, right? It's like, oh yeah, that girl, she's real dry, and that means they're a good person. So we kind of took what you do anyways when you play a game like that and just mechanized. We were thinking, okay, what does a fantasy world need? Well, fantasy world needs a foundational myth. So we kind of broke foundational myths into their core components, and we created this little worksheet where it's kind of like, okay, in the beginning, what was there? And then what happened? What changed? Because foundational myths always work like, it used to be like this, and then a bad thing happened, or we did something stupid, or someone new came and ruined it, and then there's all these problems happened, but here's how we fixed it, or someone else fixed it, or some Deus Ex Machina fixed it. But now things are different, right? we're never going to go back to that. So we broke myths into their kind of foundational elements, and you do this little worksheet where you kind of create this skeleton of a myth and then fill it in with evocative images. We kind of suggest some. And then this helps you build the themes of your world, the flavor of your world, in some ways even things like the values of your world, right? Like, did the gods step in and intervene because mortals were being stupid? Or did heroes stand up and fight back some, invading horde? This will tell you something about who is revered and who is honored in your world. And this tells you something about what's important for our game, the hierarchy of the world, and also where the source of magic is. In SCUP, the unspeakable power is the source of magic, and it can be whatever you want in your game. So in the mythology, you'll work out where the unspeakable power comes from. So in some games we've run, the unspeakable power is the blackness between the stars.
Oh, nice.
I liked that one. That one stuck with me.
That's Lovecraftian as fuck, huh?
Yeah. And this is going to be one of the pre-gen settings that we use for kind of quick start stuff for backers. In one of them, it was these stone tablets that were found underneath a mountain and that have these mysterious words on them. And when you speak them, bad things happen. The only thing that is consistent about the unspeakable power is that it is personal. It has an agenda. You can talk to it. No matter what your setting is. We were kind of thinking Tom is very into kind of a Lovecraftian horror, and we were kind of going for something that made the unspeakable power something different than magic in a lot of games where magic is just a thing you do. We kind of wanted it to be you do magic, but then magic also kind of does you. Like as you use it, like the MC can, have it make demands of you or have it talk back to you, things like that.
I think that's super cool. I think it's really interesting that you've that you've mechanized this process of world creation, because I think so many games, even many Powered by the Apocalypse games, most of them even, they kind of just leave it to a sort of like conversation that happens at the table, right? It's like, talk about what this is like, or talk about what kind of things you want to do here. And I always like it when there's a procedure, you know?
Yeah.
We just ran the Sprawl yesterday. We just started a brand new thing of the Sprawl, which is that mission-based cyberpunk game by Hamish Cameron. And it has a really similar, like, it's got a very, very proceduralized world setup, right? Like, you do this, you do this, you do this. Like, it just creates more predictable outcomes, you know, which I think is always a good thing. So I think that's super, super cool. Well, so before we dive into any more of like the sort of like mechanics of the game, I'm really curious about just the history of the project, because I ran this 3 years ago, right? Like when it was in some form of beta, and it feels like it's had kind of like a windy path to get to Kickstarter finally.
Yeah.
So what was that all about?
So Tom and I had played, if you listen to the Jank Cast, you might know Tom from our Black Diamond actual play. He played Frost in that actual play, if you were a listener to that. So Tom and I had just played in an Apocalypse World game, and we had a group that kind of wanted to do a political fantasy game. Everyone was like, you know, I'm reading Song of Ice and Fire, or The First Law, or I'm watching Vikings, or some show like that. And we wanted to do something that sort of looked like that, and we had just played Apocalypse World, and we said, you know, Apocalypse World, I think, could probably do that, right? That seems like something Apocalypse World could do. And we had looked around at some other games, like we had kind of naturally picked up Dungeon World when we thought that, and we said, well, Dungeon World is kind of about combat and questing, and in fact, most fantasy role-playing games are about combat and questing. And you know, we looked at a couple other games, and people play those games about politics. People play D&D about politics. They just don't engage a lot of the mechanics then. We looked at Reign, and Reign is much more kind of high-level battles and wars.
Yeah.
There are a couple games like that, and that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted something very kind of character drama-driven. So we just started basically playing Apocalypse World, but with swords. Like we and kind of game storming it. We spent like 15 or 20 minutes literally like coming up with some new, you know, just a few new little ideas for it and some new moves that we gave a couple of the characters. And then just kind of started playing. And like whenever someone was like, I would like to do X, we would go, oh, okay, sure, let's all come up with a move. And then Tom and I would talk the next day and we'd go, was that cool? Did that work? Let's try that. And from that, we sort of developed the skeleton of a game. We played it with some other people at some cons, and it seemed to be a thing that worked. So we eventually released the beta, and then in between us releasing the beta and now the Kickstarter we're doing, Tom and I, we met in grad school. Tom and I both wrote our dissertations and got our PhDs. He got a job and had a kid. I got 2 jobs that required me to move across the country and then move all the way back. And I had a kid. So we've just like been kind of going, oh yeah, SCUP will happen eventually. And it might not have. We might have just said, you know, the PDF is out there. That's fine. People can play that beta test. But every once in a while, we'd come up with a new idea we really liked, or we'd tweak something and we'd go, oh, this is better. We like this. We'd bat it around a little bit. And we got a lot of emails about it. We'd pretty regularly get emails from people saying, like, I played this like 3 years ago. Is it still a thing? Am I ever going to be able to hold it in my hand? Megan, who I do Wheeltree with, really wants to kickstart her game, Sparkle Baby, which is about child beauty pageants. It's a great LARP if you haven't gotten a chance to play it. But before we did that, she was kind of like, you know, I've still got some work to do on Sparkle Baby. People keep talking about SCUP. I think we could probably get people interested in SCUP. Let's just try to do it as a Kickstarter. So we were really surprised. It's already kind of hit most of its stretch goals. We were really surprised. I kind of pictured it eking in with our 6,000 goal. I really, really wanted to set it at 4,000 because that's what we did Time Cellist at. And Megan and Jen were like, that's not going to cover the cost of this game. We need hardcover books. It's just, and I kept going, I don't think it's going to hit 6,000 though. I just don't want to, I'd rather play it safe. And it hit 6,000 on its first day. Yeah, you guys killed it. Yeah. So we're pretty excited. And now I'm going to play test it a little bit this weekend at Forge. There's a few new things we're working on with it to try to kind of get it to its final stage. But yeah, we're very excited about how it's going.
I love that. What I know about Sparkle Baby, it sounds really fun. This, you know, a LARP about child beauty pageants and all that stuff, right? And your child, you know, beauty pageant entrant is like a little object or something, right? Like
yes. Yeah.
I love that idea. It's super cute. I also love the idea that your Powered by the Apocalypse Game of Thrones game essentially is the lead up to that game.
Yes, right? Yeah, right. That is, we had this kind of meeting with all of us who do Wheeltree, And we got a kick out of that too. It was kind of like, do we do the child beauty pageant game or the putting a sword through someone to steal their crown game?
Yeah, like the game that like takes the most like popular indie design movement and one of the most popular media franchises, and smashes them together, right? Yeah.
Or this very esoteric game. But it's funny because like Sparkle Baby is a game that when people like, I've watched people play it and go like, I'm just playing this because I got nothing else to do right now. I don't get what's going on. And then they get invested. There's something about like, you've got your tin can that represents your child and like, you just want your tin can to win. You want it to be better than all the other inanimate objects.
Awesome. Well, okay. So getting back to SCUP, a lot of people like refer to it as, I think it's like very colloquially or whatever, shorthand referred to as like, Game of Thrones, PbtA or whatever, which is not a bad thing. I actually, it sounds like it can be quite a bit more than that, which I think is really cool. What are some of the mechanical things going on in SCUP? Like either in terms of the moves or whatever that kind of make it distinct from even other Powered by the Apocalypse games?
Yeah. So, like I said, we kept a lot of the core of Apocalypse World because, like, most Apocalypse World hacks, they change out some of the stats and some of the basic moves in big ways, and we would try that. We would try coming up with these basic moves that were very, very different, and we'd come up with these stats that were very, very different. Maybe you have a stat called Nobility, and it just never. It was always like, oh, I really miss that stat. I really miss that move. And we started realizing that just the core of Apocalypse World kind of did what we wanted. I actually have a whole theory about Powered by the Apocalypse games, which is that there's kind of a U-shaped curve where games that are very close to the original Apocalypse World work thematically and mechanically, and then games that are very far from it work thematically and mechanically, where you take the very basic idea of kind of moves and playbooks and then apply it to something very different. But then there's this kind of valley in the middle where you've kind of taken the basic idea but just thrown a bunch of extra stuff into it. And
those are my least favorite. The ones where it's just like tons of moves. Like, oh, this is like Apocalypse World, but with 5 move sheets, right? Like,
yes, exactly. Yeah. So we've tried to keep it pretty simple in terms of what you can do. The core is pretty similar. The basic moves and stats are pretty similar. What we've done is move around a lot of the stuff on the edges and in the playbooks to give it a bit more of a different flavor. So a number of things that we've done to drive home our theme, since we're looking at politics and obligation and duty and things like that. The characters are embedded in factions. This is very different than Urban Shadows uses factions too. This is a little different. You create your own faction. So if you're from a noble family, your faction could be your noble house. If you are an artist, your faction could be the art community. If you're a thief, you could be a thieves guild or a secret society. If you're religious, it could be your religious order. The faction is the group that your status kind of rises and falls with. And having a faction means that you can get these mechanical benefits on the one hand. You can call on your faction to do things for you that we've left very ambiguously defined intentionally. It's kind of like, so an example, like one thing I saw is someone was trying to get into a party essentially that like they couldn't get into, and they called in their faction for help. And it was kind of like, it turns out someone from their faction was at the party. They succeeded. And it was kind of like, oh, don't you know who this is? Of course they get to come in. Yeah. But the faction can also make demands of you. You have to kind of stay in their good graces. It's kind of seen as ignoble if you refuse requests of people in your faction. We also have a similar thing with what we call patrons. A lot of the characters will, and playbooks will have someone who they work for. If you are the playbook that we call the Gauntlet for a...
Holla!
Exactly.
Yes.
The Gauntlet works for someone else. Like the Gauntlet is someone who is a sword for hire working for a lord or some other rich person who can kind of pay them. A thief, we have a splat called the Black Hood, who's a thief or an assassin. They usually work for a guild or a secret society. And your patron can call on you, can say, hey, I'm the person paying you and keeping you employed, so you got to go do this thing for me. So we tried to think about, most people in Apocalypse World are kind of free agents. And some of them are in this, but we tried to think about what would be the obligations that someone in a world with a hierarchy would have, right?
Well, that's super genre appropriate, right? Like if we're thinking about if we're thinking about the First Law, if we're thinking about Song of Ice and Fire, like that makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
Well, and even like, Urban Shadows has factions, but it's kind of a meta thing in Urban Shadows, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
The factions aren't super explicitly tied to the fiction. At least I've not found that to be the case. Like,
like you are in a faction, but the faction doesn't necessarily. And like the MC can choose to have the faction make a demand of you, but it's just in the fiction. If the MC does that, it's not as much mechanized.
Characters in the setting don't say I'm part of the dark faction, right? Like,
yes, exactly.
It's just,
Yeah, this is very much like your faction is very much in the fiction. They have a name, like they have relationships with the other factions that you determine. Like it is about it's the people that you are actually embedded with. You see these people, you interact with them, they're part of the fiction. We also then gave the MC very different moves. We actually broke up. I don't know if I've ever seen a PbtA game quite do it like we've done it here, but we really like MC moves. That's always been one of my favorite things about Apocalypse World. I think it was a real innovation of Apocalypse World to not have the MC roll dice, but instead have the MC make moves at appropriate times. That's to me one of the core insights of the game. And what we did was give the MC different moves to use against people depending on who they are. So there are moves for elite characters that are things like make them fulfill the duties of their station, or show them how far they'll fall if they don't, whatever, or, spread rumors and innuendo behind their back. And then there are moves for common characters that are like crush them with debt to those who have more than them, or show them how insignificant they are in things, or show them how much they stand to gain if they whatever. And then we also have moves, MC moves for people who use the Unspeakable Power. Like I said, the Unspeakable Power is personal and has an agenda. So the Unspeakable Power can promise you things but make demands of you. So we have MC moves to use when someone maybe misses a roll trying to use the Unspeakable Power. How does the Unspeakable Power manifest itself? What does it want from you? What does it take from you? What does it demand of you? So that's kind of what we've tried to do to bring some of the setting alive. And there are a number of other little things. We have a mechanic, a little kind of stat we're using called honor, which doesn't mean how honorable you are, but more like what does your name mean? And that allows you to do things like, if someone makes a request of you, refuse the request. And if you don't do well at that, it could make your honor go down. It might you might seem kind of ignoble or uncharitable if you do that. Honor is what's used to trigger moves with your faction. The more of it you have, the more likely they are to kind of come to your aid or help you out. The less of it you have, the more likely they are to rebuff your request. So just a kind of some peripheral stuff that we've done to bring the hierarchy and the themes of, kind of power and obligation and privilege and duty alive in the game.
One of the things that I think is the trickiest aspects of Powered by the Apocalypse games, especially for new GMs or new MCs, I suppose we should say, is how to utilize the moves and like understanding the function of the moves and understanding like your sort of like role at the table, right? I think that can be very tricky. I think it's just difficult when like there aren't like dice kind of arbitrating everything, right? Does that make sense? And so one of the things that I thought was really great when I first started getting into these games was the moves, the MC moves in particular, and the agendas and the principles, obviously, but the moves really kind of have a teaching function, right? Like they show you, like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is the kind of stuff you should be doing. And I like that. I like the games that really, really like lay that out for the MC, And I just think it's like a great toolbox. And I the way I play, I don't like keep the move sheet in front of me and like, pick like whenever it's my turn to like do a move. I just study them and I kind of internalize it, right? And then I kind of go with that. So I think that's pretty cool.
And I think that's part of what we were going for too. We've written whole things in the MC section of the book itself about how to play this game. Because, for a while, what we talked about was mechanizing all the hierarchy and obligation and saying, like, okay, because we used to have something that was kind of like strings in Monster Hearts, where it was like you would have all these like connections to people and you could kind of pull on them to make them do things. And if you had a score of this, then you couldn't say this to this person. And the more we mechanized it, A, the less people used it, and B, the less fun it was.
That's 100%
like on some
true.
level, yeah. So that's when we came up with the idea of, rather than it being a thing where you had a score in this and a connection to this and a person that you could say this to but not that, these ways of like really hardcore mechanizing the we may think of like hard mechanics to mechanize the hierarchy and the obligation, instead to kind of make them more soft mechanics where, so, you have a patron and there's a few little things that give your patron power over you. And the MC has like, we have all this stuff in the MC section about thinking about hierarchy and like how to use the moves to kind of push that theme. The other thing about the hard mechanization of hierarchy is that ultimately, even if someone is common and lowly in the world you've created, the game is still about them.
Right, yeah.
And what wound up happening, so it doesn't matter if one person is playing the king and the other person is playing like some street artist, the game is still about the two of them, right? So on some level, when we hard mechanized the mechanics, it made it harder to do that. It was kind of like,
why would this peasant have a string on the king or whatever?
Exactly,
right?
yeah. But like we need that to happen, right? Like for the game to be interesting, you need to have, the peasant and the king cross paths, and they need to be able to interact in some way. So the soft mechanics kind of got out of the way of that and let the interpersonal drama happen a little bit more, instead of having these kind of things that were constantly saying, okay, you have to do this and you can't talk to this person and you have to go get a point in this before you can do X. Yeah. So the more we put that in, the more we pull it out.
I think it's super good insight. I mean, Monster Hearts, the first Monster Hearts, I've played it a bunch, I've run it a bunch, and conditions and strings tend to just fall off, right? Like
yes,
they tend to just fall away. It's like where no one's using them, no one's paying attention to them, and it's because we don't need them, right? Like the moves are doing a lot of work, and just the sort of the moves are doing a lot of work from both the MC side and the player side, and we're just really invested in the fiction, and those two currencies kind of like, or conditions aren't really currency, but they don't really they just stop doing as much, right? And I think that's changed a little bit in Monster Hearts 2. I think they're a little better in Monster Hearts 2, but I think that's really, I agree. I just totally agree with that. I think the amount that a currency in PbtA gets used is like inversely proportional to how many of them there are,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
Like,
and there was a point where we had like 4 different extra currencies, and I remember playtesting it with Will Palachuk and Tim, and they were just like, you don't need this.
Right, yeah.
The game just does this. Like, I don't need this number telling me I can do this. You just can get rid of it, and I'll just do it.
I think you can say the same thing about the number of moves, too. Like, I was playtesting Zombie World, which is excellent, by the way, by Mark Diaz Truman, and he had one move like that was for like kind of an act under pressure thing, or keep your cool thing. Like, it was sort of a catch-all move to handle situations. And then he had 3 different zombie moves that did the same thing, but just 3 permutations of it. And I was like, and we talked about it, and he was like, oh yeah, I think maybe that's too many moves, I think that's I'm kind of with you on that. Like, there's a tendency to want to, because you're creating something new, there's a tendency to want to like put your stamp on it, or really find the thing that's going to make it stand out, and I think it's not needed sometimes. So cool. Well, so a lot of cool playbooks from what I can tell from the Kickstarter and what I've seen just in the past. Which is your favorite?
We concentrated a lot on the playbooks in this, because like I was saying, since we kept the core the same, what we wanted to do is make the playbooks shine. And the thing that we really focused on with the playbooks was, I'm always disappointed when I pick up a PbtA game and all the playbook moves are like, get +1 to do this, switch this stat out for this. That's useful, but like, I'm playing a PbtA game so I can do the big thing, right? So we really wanted each playbook to have these big narrative pushing moves that kind of like, even the kind of moves that are fun even if you fail, where you want to roll it because it's like, this is just going to do a cool thing. So there's 2 that really come to my mind for my favorite playbook. One is the Screw, in part because that was the first playbook I played at our very first playtest. The Screw is a torturer. We actually have a whole section in the book that's like, discuss if you even want the Screw in your game. Sure, obviously, some people might not. I've never played a game where the torture's been on camera when we've had the Screw. It's usually like, off camera, fade to black kind of thing. But the way the Screw works is like, they are good at getting information from people. So they have these very powerful information gathering moves. And these moves that are kind of like, that work on NPCs, that are like, make them say a thing you want them to say, or make them go do a thing you want them to do. Nothing gets back to you. Your hands are clean. Yeah. So I enjoy playing the Screw because I really like high information games. Like, one of the things that was very revealing to me about Apocalypse World in general was that you didn't have to wander around going, who's my enemy? What's really going on? The MC is kind of holding everything from you. You could use a couple rolls and figure out what's going on and then do a thing. So the Screw is a very high information character. That's why I played it. In our first playtest, I played a character named Fallow the Screw. She was a teenage girl who was the illegitimate daughter of the king, who he kind of kept hidden from the world. So she got up to kind of nefarious things to advance her agenda, and then killed the king, her father, on her wedding day. And we kind of looked, Tom and I kind of looked at each other, and we were like, this is what we want.
Right, yeah.
We want other people to have this experience, right? I also really like the voice. The voice is an advisor to power. Think Littlefinger from Song of Ice and Fire. Think Worm Tongue from Lord of the Rings. And the themes of the game really come through well on the voice. It's a lot of like, so Tom came up with this thing. The voice was Tom's idea. And like the first thing he wrote for it was this very evocative list. The voice always wants something. They have a desire. And it's like this very evocative list of desires. And it was like, you want enough gold, enough riches to drown someone in. Or you want the crown, not just any crown, but the crown. Or you want that special, perfect someone. Aren't they just so perfect and wonderful and you hate them and they're wonderful? Just these things that are very like, you can just know the person who is driven by this like base need or desire they have. And then at the end of it, Tom wrote, if you achieve your desire, you'll be happy for 5 minutes. Yes. Now pick a new desire.
That's good.
Because that's just what you're like if you're the voice.
Yeah,
so they have all these moves that are like about lying. So one of them is like, they have a move called an ear at each door, where you have a network of spies and you can get information about people. So at any time you want, you just kind of be like, even if the person's not in the scene, I want to know more about that person, this one NPC or this one character. Roll and you can kind of get information about them. And if you use that information specifically to undermine them, you get +1 forward.
Nice.
The voice has a move where they can like rile a crowd, basically, and you can kind of hide your tracks so no one knows it was you. The voice has a move where they counsel someone in power and they could kind of shift their agenda to your agenda, basically. So if you counsel like the king, you can be like, don't worry about that. Worry about this thing over here.
Yeah.
The themes of the game really come through well with the voice. And when people play it, they really get to kind of chew the scenery as like, whispering to the king and being this sort of advisor in the shadows with this network of spies and things like that.
Nice. Well, it's like sort of big picture. Like, what's your favorite thing about SCUP? Like, why are people going to love this game?
The thing I like about SCUP is it tends to go like it's very blood opera, right? It tends to get these kind of big conflicts and these big machinations between people. I really enjoy that in games in general. I like these sort of setting up these relationships between people and having these things happen. I like, and I've found that people like having the big moves that we've tried to give the characters. One of them is the Beloved, who's a prophet, can literally see people's inner demons that represent like the manifestations of their fears and their failures and their evil deeds or wickedness, and can confront their inner demons. And if they best those demons, then they permanently change that character. When someone is playing the Beloved and they have that move, like there's always a moment where they'll be arguing with some NPC and they'll be like, I'm going to use that move.
Right.
Like I don't have to deal with this, right? I can like literally go in their head and confront this manifestation of their inner demons and change them. And stuff like that I think is really fun. We've also, one of the things we tried to do, part of why we have these big narrative pushing moves is, we were thinking of like what gets people invested in Game of Thrones, in A Song of Ice and Fire. And like one of the things is the big things that happen in that. Like when I first read that first book, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't know, spoilers for an old book that you've all probably know about, but I didn't know that Ned Stark was going to get killed. Right, and like this, of course, yeah. it was almost delightful to me, having read the book when the TV show came out, to come to that episode and have all of America freak out about that happening.
Right, yeah.
My wife was like, wait, what happened? Like, and like, it's very easy in games to get timid, right? As the MC or as a player, to kind of let that stuff slide and be like, well, we're just going to let all the NPCs live. And of course you have permission to do that in Apocalypse World. But one of the things we tried to do, and this is once again, give these big narrative pushing moves. The Black Hood can just once per session kill someone, kill an NPC, make a roll. If you succeed, you assassinated an NPC. If you have this move, if you fail, you didn't do it and you probably got caught. That doesn't look good. But we also created these things called end of season moves. There's kind of a thing that triggers them eventually, like when you're kind of getting ready to like close out the game, to put it away for a while. There's kind of various things that allow these moves to trigger. They're optional moves. We've had players say, I would never use those, they're too big. But basically we're trying to say, how would you mechanize the death of Ned Stark or the Red Wedding? How would you mechanize that? And what we came up with was this series of moves, and you can kind of take one. The players trigger them. The players can take them and say, like, because they often involve the character dying, and saying, like, I'm kind of ready for my character to be done. I'm kind of ready for something big to happen to my character that changes their life. I'm going to take this end of season move. And then eventually they can trigger that move when some stuff happens. And the way we've written them is basically like, you are are completely burned out from the inside by the unspeakable power. You're not even human anymore. Whatever you are, what are you even? Or everything you've ever known and everything you've ever loved crashes down around you. Tell us what that looks like, and you and the MC will work out this just horrible fate for your character or the people around them. And then one of them is actually very beautiful. Like, one of them is like, you know, you experience this moment of transcendent beauty, but you are not there anymore. Like, how do you leave the world, basically?
These are great. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's it.
Yeah,
it reminds me a little bit of like the death moves in Grimworld, or the I
yes.
think there's like a version of Monster Hearts that has death moves, right? Yeah, I love that. It's really cinematic, and I'm always in for like any kind of like mechanic that increases the sort of cinematic nature of what we're doing at the table, right?
Exactly, and that's what we were going for. Even calling them end of season moves, we were trying to think of like, what would be the thing that, like, when after you've played 8 or 9 sessions or something and you're ready to be done with the game, but maybe you'll pick it up again in a year, what would be the thing that would like happen that would make you go, maybe we come back to this? And that's what we kind of built them around, was like characters dying or everything changing, alliances shifting, you know, empires falling, that sort of thing. So we really wanted them to give permission to let the players say, I would like a big thing to happen, and give the MC then permission to do these massive things to characters or in the world that would just change everything. And that's something I'm really excited for people to get to use. And I think that's something people like about the game, is that we've built in this ability to do big things.
I think that's really cool. Well, so Todd, tell us just a little bit about the Kickstarter. At what levels can people pledge to get certain things? And if you have any any clues you want to drop about future stretch goals, that'd be cool.
So we have 3 stretch goals. As of this morning, we made all of them. So that's cool. One of them, the first 2 were about the artwork. Marnie Galloway, who is an amazing comic book artist from Chicago, she is going to do the art for the book. She has this amazing abstract style. And in particular, this is who we've wanted to do the art forever. And in particular, we were interested in Marnie because she actually has a lot of experience with like medieval art, and she hand makes books and hand makes like woodblock carvings that we think will kind of inform her ability to do something for this.
That's actually super cool to hear, because I've seen some chatter here and there about people seeing like the different samples, like Marnie's artwork that were on the Kickstarter, and being like, I'm not sure how this is going to fit thematically with the game, right?
She is a comic book artist, and she draws comics, and I think her style is a bit cartoony for what we're going for. But what we really wanted was the backgrounds that she draws. She draws these amazing backgrounds, and we have these visions for how we'll incorporate these kind of abstract styles into all the different character playbooks. Like, I've had pictures in my head for what she could do for literally years.
Nice.
And I just had a phone conversation with her about them on Tuesday, so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, the woodblock medieval angle is really interesting to hear. That's cool.
Yeah, like that's kind of what, like, it you know, if you've seen her comic book work, I can see how you might be like, is this scup? But like, if you've seen her woodblock art, it's really cool. The next one that we just hit is Tom, myself, and Jen are going to design some limited edition playbooks. They'll probably come after the main book. To give you some ideas of those, we want to design one called The Folk that Tom and I have been talking about forever, which is you play multiple characters who are all kind of common folk in the town. So you might pick 3 people: the bartender, the maid at the castle, and, you know, the blacksmith or something like that. And you could kind of put them in any scene where they make sense, and a lot of the moves will then be about undermining authority, spreading rumors, you know, almost like they're kind of the people who will lead the social movement.
To be clear, you play all of these characters. Like, you have access to all these characters at once. Yeah. That's cool.
And there's a lot of games that have sort of troop play, and in fact, like, you know, that was something that was in, because if you think about it, in Apocalypse World, you can play multiple PCs. Like, you can eventually build a second PC. So we kind of want to design that right into the playbook, where you have these kind of different people who share moves and probably are related to each other in some way. Jen is going to design a book. She's got 2 books that she's going to do. One is called The Jewel, for example, and it's someone who has some kind of mystical or other power or otherwise that makes them desirable to people in power. So like someone wants to possess her, someone wants to marry her, someone wants to capture her, to use her power for something. So her moves are going to revolve around, in some ways, escape and independence, getting away from the people who would hold you down.
That's cool.
Using your power to kind of maintain your independence from powerful people who would seek to kind of possess you for their own. We are trying to line up a next tier stretch goal. We have some people we're talking to about making that happen. So hopefully I will be able to have more information about that soon. And we're also going to open up some new tiers. We're going to open up some retailer tiers. We've had some interest in that. We're going to open up some tiers that will have to do with artwork. Marnie has volunteered to draw people's characters if they're interested in that. Cool. So we will probably go ahead and open up that tier in a week or so. If you want to spend a lot of money, Marnie will personally draw your character for you. I would not have approached her with that. She's busy. She's got stuff going on. But she was like, "What if I did this?" And I said, "Okay,
yes,
sure.
Yes, please."
If you're into that. Awesome. So we'll probably be opening that stuff up as soon as possible. So if you're a member of the Wheel Tree Press Facebook community, Google Plus community, if you follow the Kickstarter, you'll see all that stuff.
And when's the last day for the campaign?
The last day of the Kickstarter is April 30th, if I remember correctly.
All right, well, listeners, go check out that Kickstarter if it sounds good to you. I have backed it. I'm excited about it. Let's listen to our sponsor spot real quick.
This episode of the Gauntlet Podcast is sponsored by our friends at Nocturnal Media. Now, for the month of April 2017, Nocturnal Media has a brand new Kickstarter up. I'm super excited about it. In fact, I twisted Jason's arm so that I could come on and talk about it. It is Talislanta, the Savage Land. Now, for an old gamer like me, you might think of Talislanta from old Dungeon Magazine articles, which proudly proclaimed no elves. Talislanta came out in 1986 originally. And the original setting for it, which came out over 20 years worth of content, was 1,000 years after a cataclysm, and it was very fantastical. It wasn't based on your normal Tolkien kind of European medieval fantasy. It was more based on the fantasy novels of Jack Vance, as well as the Elric series by Moorcock, and that was where it really had its heart. Now, one of the things I most fondly remember of Talislanta is the Jaka race, which is this wolf panther anthropomorphized hunter type. And oh man, they were awesome. I played a Jaka. Well, I took the Jaka and revamped it into Star Wars D6 for a character that I played one time, which is awesome because Talislanta the Savage Land has 3 versions of the game that will be coming out. The Talislanta, which is a version of the Omega system, I believe, which is pretty cool because it has 4 levels of success on a simple D20 roll. And then you can also, if you want, get it in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, or hey, Open D6, which is the D6 system that I used when I played Star Wars. I'm really excited about this, and the best part about it is if you're interested at all, the buy-in is $5. $5 to get any of the 3 PDF rules systems that you'd like. Lots of cool tiers and stretch goals that they've already blown away. So give it a look. Talislanta, the Savage Land. Other thing is, this is kind of a prequel to all of the stuff. So you don't know Talislanta? That's okay, because this is set right after the Cataclysm. And it's kind of a magical post-apocalypse, which is kind of awesome for those of us who like PbtA type of games and settings. Beautiful art, 23 different races that you can play, and they all look amazing. There is even a webcomic that's coming out coinciding with Talislanta Savage Land. So if you want to immerse into a really interesting, rich, detailed, and unique setting, this is the way to go. Check it out for sure. And thanks again to Nocturnal for sponsoring the show.
It's Giving Me Life. Todd, this is the section of the show where we talk about something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy, not necessarily related to role-playing games, though it can be, inspired somewhat by rants on your show, and possibly the inverse of rants in some ways.
The rants have become happier over the years. We actually thought about getting rid of it for a while because the people who started the podcast, Lex and John Kelly, are ranty. Like, they're both people who are like, wind them up and they'll complain for 6 hours. And of the people who are on now, only Megan really likes to rant. Like, all the rest of us are kind of like, let's say fun, nice stuff. So we thought about getting rid of it, and then we just said, nah, it's part of the show. We'll just say whatever you want. Like, at the end of the cast, just say whatever you want. But it's definitely tends to steer negative. But Jen talks about like work, or Joe talks about work or whatever. So yeah, giving me life. I am happy to do this. I tend to be more of a happy ranter than a negative ranter.
For sure. I'll go first. So the thing giving me life is there's this new podcast. It's like the big hotness in podcasts right now called S-Town, which is short for Shittown. And it is so amazing. Oh boy, it is just, it's mind-blowingly good. It's devastatingly good. They released all the episodes at once, so you can listen to the whole series at one time. And it's essentially, they make you think that it's initially kind of a true crime podcast, which is very in vogue, you know, but it actually isn't. It ends up being this more novelistic or literary kind of storytelling exercise, because it kind of unpacks this central character and the people in their life and the town that the actual S-Town of the name of the show. And it just takes so many interesting twists. Like every episode, it's like a different type of show. It's like, oh, now it's a show about this, but no, now it's a show about this, but it's actually a show about this. And it all kind of builds up to this really, really beautiful crescendo. I'm trying not to spoil anything because I don't normally believe in spoilers, but like in this case, I think it's really great to go in with no idea about what the story is about, because the journey is like really part of enjoying the show. Like just it's such a carefully crafted narrative. I mean, I'm not even kidding. Like it felt like the first time I read Moby Dick or watched Pulp Fiction, or I'm serious. Like it felt like that. I was like, this feels so amazing and special. And from a narrative standpoint, like just fucking brilliant. So if you have an interest in storytelling, if you have an interest in Southern Gothic, this is very much a Southern Gothic tale. The town, S-Town, is in Alabama. Go check out S-Town, listeners. You're going to love it. It's so cool.
Yeah, I just downloaded a bunch of them because I got my bus ride to Forge, so I'll probably. That'd be great. Oh, it'll put you in the right headspace too, Todd. You'll be ready to tell stories, right? So that's good. I really like Southern noir, and I also try to keep up on top of any kind of stuff that has to do with, like, in the popular imagination, has to do with crime, because I teach a criminology class.
Yeah. You'll love it.
Good.
It's so great. What's giving you life, Todd?
So I have a kid. He's 3, and he just kind of has now hit the age where I had a friend who calls them three-nagers. He's a bit more rambunctious, but he also can kind of talk back to you in an interesting way. He's talked for a long time. He's been very verbal, never shuts up. But now he definitely has interactions with you where it's not just he's talking and you talk and then he talks. It's kind of like he listens to you and he interprets what you say and thinks about it. But he's also picking up interesting things. And the thing that just has been giving me life, so to speak, lately is before I put him to bed, I have no idea where he learned this. He insists on giving me kisses on both cheeks, like French style both cheek kisses. But he does it in this super dramatic way where he I pick him up and he takes my whole head and turns it and then just like that on my one cheek, and then turns my whole head and does it to the other cheek, equally, just over dramatic, and then does it often 4 or 5 times, back and forth, and then he goes, "Good night." No idea where he got this. Did we watch a movie where he saw? I have no idea where this could have come from, but somehow he picked up on just doing these super dramatic, and I could just try to keep a straight face. And the second I walk out of his room after I put him in bed, I just crack up every night. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen a kid do.
It's so good.
So that's what's giving me life. That I just puts me in a really good mood every time he does it.
It's awesome. Well, so Todd, thanks so much for being on the show. This has been really fun.
Yeah, this has been great. I'm so glad to have gotten to be on.
Where can we find you, on, say, social media or whatever?
Just look for Wheeltree Press and or the Jank Cast. We have Twitter, Facebook, and Google Plus stuff for all of them. Google Plus is probably the best for both. We have a Wheeltree Press community. We have a Jank Cast page. But then we also post stuff on Facebook. We're not on Twitter as much. Wheeltreepress.com and jankcast.com are our websites if people want to look for those. Those are the best ways to kind of find me. I stay on top of both those pretty well.
Awesome. Thanks. Listeners, that's our show. If you want to get in touch with us, we have a G Plus community. Just go to the community section of G Plus and search for The Gauntlet. We also have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com, where you can find links to all of our other shows. And if you want to support us on Patreon, we always love that. It's patreon.com/gauntlet. And right now we have, for $4 or higher patrons, you can get a copy of Codex Iron, the newest issue of our little RPG zine. So go check that out. But yeah, this has been great. Todd, thanks again.
Thank you.
And listeners, that's our show. Thanks for listening.